Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a quick beginner's guide here to Kingsvein. First and foremost, before we get started, there was a question that I saw come up quite a bit for folks that were returning from previous games, and you may notice that there's some characters here running options that you wouldn't normally have. Yes, there are New Game Plus options. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this here. So, beginner's stuff. What do you actually need to know to get started in this game? Well, most of it tells you right there in the tutorial. Basically, that you can interact with just about everything. Your combat skills work the same out of combat as much as they do in combat, and effectively, when it comes to actually progressing here, you more or less decide when and where you want to go. So, a few general rules of thumb to bear in mind, as well as kind of a little bit of an introduction to what our different stuff here does mechanically. So, first of all, let's go ahead and look over our characters here. So for every one of your characters, you will have 2 hand slots, an armor slot, 3 accessory slots, as well as 3 carryable item slots. For all of these, what these will effectively do is that your weapon slots can be used interchangeably at any given time. Certain weapons require both hands, but most of them are one-handed. There are also additionally items like gauntlets that you'll be able to equip in your offhand to augment your primary weapon, but additionally there will be certain skills that potentially allow you to use both slots at the same time in different ways. One of the examples being something like the marksman having the ability to essentially reload a crossbow by swinging a sword. So, just something to bear in mind that there's going to be a lot of potential interactions here, so keep your mind open. This is not going to be a very standard experience as far as RPGs go. You're kind of looking to twist the systems, as it were. Alright, so as far as your primary weapon categories, one of the things that you need to bear in mind right from the get-go is your R3 function. How are these relevant? Well, for any weapon type that you run into, if you go and highlight it with R3, it will tell you exactly what it does. So, for example, swords will have better basic hitting power, but will be limited in terms of their range. Stuff like a spear will potentially have 2 tiles of range, and we'll be able to hit on both of those. But it will potentially be a little weaker than the sword there. Actually, something to bear in mind is that as far as the spear goes, if you use a melee skill on a spear, you can also actually use this to bypass, for example, hitting an ally in front of you, because the skill will still be targeting 1 tile instead of 2. So this can potentially be used to sort of reach around your compatriots there, so to speak. Something like maces, on the other hand, are going to be potentially attacking diagonally. Let me go ahead and put his mace back in his hand there. Which again is probably why you start off with some of these. They're able to attack diagonally. This actually does open up a lot of options for follow-up attacks and things like that. So there's that. But again, remember your R3 function. There is specifically a function in the game, or an achievement in the game, for going and scanning 50% of the items in it, just to kind of probably let you know that this is an important function in terms of knowing what does what. Okay, for another thing, let's go ahead and talk about doors. I know that seems like a bit of a weird thing, and actually one more tangent that I forgot to mention. I saw somebody saying that it was unfair that your mount couldn't carry items. This is your mount's items right over here. Your stash that's why he's got all these pockets. So, I'm not sure why that was a question, but there you go. Okay. Now then, what I was mentioning about those combat skills, one of the things that you can do is actually ambush enemies from different corners. So, in this case, we're right at the very beginning of the game, so we're not necessarily going to have too much to be able to do that with, but as you end up getting additional skills and potentially upgrading their range and things like that, you will end up seeing more kind of options popping out there in that direction. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is technically starting off in New Game Plus, so if you're wondering why this guy has knockback skills right from the get-go, one of the options that you get at that point is to actually go improve a lot of the skills of enemy units and whatnot, so that's a fun change. Like, as far as replayability goes, I was a little bit surprised to see all these additional things thrown in there. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and continue on here. So, in terms of your overall strategy and things like that, everything that you see is potentially a tool in your favor. So, for example, those pushback moves could be used to maybe put this guy in a worse position. Or, for example, you saw that we had that ready skill over on one of our units. So, while this is just one solitary guy, if we were running into a bigger fight and it broke out in this area, one thing to potentially consider might be something along the lines of, let's say, throwing this guy behind this door, like we just bash him behind this door, throw some traps out in front of it, and stand back here with a spear. And basically that leaves him with the options of, do I jump straight into the trap, or do I end up getting poked by the spear? So always keep all of these different options in mind when you're going and exploring, because potentially there might be, more out there than a direct fight. So never take a direct fight if you can avoid it. Always try to open fights with ambushes and things like that. In this case, we're going to go ahead and not walk in there. That doesn't look like something we're quite ready for yet. Alright, one beginner thing that I want to mention right from the get-go is that all of your skills that are in your skill tree will give you all kinds of different traversal items. Like right now, I might not be able to jump over to that item, but we already have all of the tools that we need in order to actually go get to that bubble in the center. So whenever you see a bubble with something in it, like with a dot in the middle, that means that there's an item inside of it, which means that it might be something worth getting. Now, we already have all of the tools that we need to actually go get this thing. So let's go ahead and look over what we've got. Well, we see that we've got a chain pull, so this is one of the skills that I would definitely recommend picking up early. It's going to be on your chisel, and Ramir here will be able to start off with the option to switch into chisel almost immediately. Actually, I think it might actually be immediately. So in that case, we can go ahead and see this less as a kind of a direct we need an item to get there puzzle, and more that we already have the tools on hand. For every puzzle that you see, you almost always will already have the tools on hand. So in this case, I want to go ahead and get to that item, and in this case it's just a simple pushing puzzle. But just so you know, again, I know I'm reiterating the same thing over and over, but I cannot stress this enough that when it comes to your items, everything is potentially an overworld interaction as well. So if we went over to our skills and we just pull this a little bit closer, we still would be able to manipulate the item through the chain there, or through our push skills if we wanted to just bash this thing instead, because we were feeling barbaric, I guess. We'd be able to go and get to this item right now. So just kind of bear this in mind as far as your items go. Additionally, as far as your inventory goes, everybody has a preferred way that they like to arrange their inventory, but just so you know, if you would prefer to use the sort of system-preferred way of handling things, there is an organize button up here. Alright, next thing. You've got accessories and hidden items all over the place. Like, for example, I won't tell you where, but there's an accessory located pretty much within a few seconds of your starting area that allows you to rearrange whatever items you'd like in your inventory without taking up any of your actions. Now, by itself, that may not necessarily seem like much. Like, what, are you just carrying extra weapons or stuff like that? Well, maybe. Actually, one trick that somebody showed me that I thought was really, really fun was the fact that, yes, you have to reload crossbows after firing them, but if you had let's say, a bandolier full of crossbows, you never have to reload your crossbow. So, while it is tedious between fights, that could potentially be a way to rapid fire your crossbows. There's a lot of little tricks like that, so pay attention to the exact descriptions that something tells you. Alright. Next little tool that I want to mention are these rocks. So these are going to be available all over the place, but sometimes you just need a 1 damage tap to go do something. Maybe it's to hit a switch, maybe it's to go finish off, say, one of the lesser wisp nodes or something like that. So bear in mind that these are something that's going to be available in your inventory. One thing I want to point out, because I got really excited over something that actually ended up working a completely different way. There is one particular skill that specifically mentions that it will improve your ability to use trigger stones. Regular stones are not trigger stones. I know that's a weird distinction, but just so you know, there is a distinction between them. They are just regular rocks. They are not trigger stones. Those are a totally different thing. So you can't spec into the throwing rock only build, though man oh man I want to try a throwing rock only run of this game at some point. Anyway. Alright, next important thing to bear in mind. They give you a bandage in the introduction, but as far as your bandages go, they're going to be your primary combat heals. There's something that you can actually make more of as well, so we're going to go ahead and go over to this direction over here. Quick little quality of life note while we're on our way. If you ever select your Wyvern as your primary, kind of a primary unit here, you'll be able to go dash around everywhere on top of this thing instead of having the entire party. This is useful for making your units avoid traps, as well as potentially giving you more space to work with. Alright, so right now we're going to go ahead and go over to one of the earliest areas here that you really should be aware of. And that's going to be your blacksmith shop right over here. You can get a few extra bits and pieces to make this place work better, but as far as your first weapon upgrades, you actually start off with a good sword over here. It's going to be the same one that your main character starts with. And we have the option to get a 60% chance of bonus damage, so we can go ahead and slap this onto any of our characters, just kind of improve them. A few quality of life notes while we are in this room right now. So for one thing, actually wait, did I forget to give people spells? I sure did. Hold on, some of y'all need to be using some spells and things. Actually no, he already is a mystic. What's with that? Alright. Well, in that case, we're going to go ahead and use that rock over there on our main character, so we just select it. Go ahead and... that is not our main character. I apologize, my first save file, that looks just like my main character from that save file, and then instead I have this guy this time around. I just keep mixing them up. Anyway, what I was trying to show is that you can actually throw a fireball, for example, to go light that sconce. I know it's a minor thing I mention in every video, but it is worth mentioning that any source of an element is the source of that element. And it doesn't matter whether it's a fireball or if I go and use this lantern that I'm using in my hand on it. It'll light up a room, it'll be nice and cozy, it makes it easier to see stuff, and, you know, there might be ways to use a lantern in combat too. I'm just saying, again, everything is kind of a tool. Anyway, so if you wanted to break down items, like for example if you have something with ore in the name, you can just throw it in the furnace here and you'll get a lump of ore, and you have access to crafting kits that you'll end up picking up from all over the dang place that will allow you to turn those into basic items. So this is useful for, like, let's say you have an archer and you don't exactly have any bows at your disposal, and you just got a new type of material, and it's a suit of armor or something like that, and you're already good on armor. So you just go ahead and throw that in the furnace. You get that piece of metal, and now you make it into a bow instead. So you can go and kind of tailor out your equipment back into its base minerals to keep around as crafting components if you want to make something else out of them. This isn't a waste. You do have crafting kits that will be available for, as far as I've seen, everything, so you're perfectly safe in terms of going and melting down your items like that. Just so you know, in terms of sell value, you have a few stores that are out there. I just want to warn you ahead of time, don't bother stockpiling rusty equipment. It has no value whatsoever outside of just being a basic thing that you can swing. Okay? Alright, next item here is going to be the Olsak, I think is how this is pronounced. This is going to be a throwable rock that will do 5 damage. This is good. Like, that's a pretty darn solid amount of damage for most of the game. However, if you wrap it in a bandage, it'll go ahead and upgrade its healing to 6. Something to mention on the on items. So if you hold down your button to go move an item, if you're on a controller, that's how you end up dragging these things around. A lot of use items, like for example this essence gem, if I were to use it right now, would end up switching over to a use effect. So just bear in mind that yes, holding down the button or potentially tapping the button will give you different functions depending on context. This is something you'll figure out pretty quickly, but it's really just the figuring out that you can hold down the button that matters in that case. Alright, next thing to notice is that your fights are both the treat, kind of the treat and the brick wall that you're going to run into. So as you wander around, you'll notice that there's not very many direct ambushes. There are some cases where there are ambushes, but in most cases you're going to see the enemies before they see you. Remember that you're basically a spy in this universe, coming down to hunt things, so presumably they're pretty good at being sneaky. Anyway, so as we explore around, we'll find different avenues into different areas to approach fights from different directions, and this does include things like, let's say, using the rope pull that we picked up earlier to go set up a wall of sconces as traps. There's a lot of different tools that you can use, and I'm sure that somebody more familiar with the overall systems of this game may potentially have more in-depth ways to get damage directly, but I like playing these games tricky, so let's go ahead and go about it that way. So in this case, we can just go ahead and use our bash and our chain pull to go put stuff like this into position, and let's go ahead and circle around here. Alright, so what we can do is use this to block off the area. So, if we were to take that fight, let's say we bash this thing into position here, we now will have essentially a blockade right here. As you can see, there are other sconces littered about, and you can do this with furniture too. There's nothing stopping you from, let's say, barricading doors with furniture in order to make sure that you have a nice, convenient way to go and fire a bunch of arrows from inside a building rather than going and, honor dueling everybody out in the front. So, just, a tool to have at your arsenal there. Also, different ranks of bash can actually be useful for moving things around in different amounts. So, like in this case, I only want to be able to move this one tile, so I'm going to use the chain to pull it down one tile instead of using the bash to push it forward two. And we're just going to go ahead and throw it that way. Just little details to bear in mind. This isn't like how you should be approaching every single fight, but I'm just letting you know this is an option. This is something that you can be doing, and something that could be a fun way of handling things for you if you like these environmental interactions as much as I do. And if you're doing so, if your brazier is knocked over, you can always double tap it, just like a switch, in order to go ahead and activate it. So now what we have is a situation where they would have to get close, and we can go ahead and put another sconce over here, maybe put some furniture over here, and we can use this little trap area to force everybody into a bit of a fire. It gives us a lot of kind of area of control here, and we probably would want to go pick up some ranged weapons to take advantage of this. Again, like, this is just the way that I prefer to play. You do you. Like, you do what you find fun. But to me, this is absolutely the bee's knees, so, be as tricky as you want. Just so you know, any traps or anything else that you set up, for one thing, they will be subject to rough terrain. So, for example, this rubble over here will be blocking you from moving something on top of it. But additionally, anything that you move will be permanent. Any traps that you put down will be permanent. So you can feel free to set some of this stuff up. Look at it as a puzzle for later, and go ahead and come on back later. So just something, especially if you're playing on higher difficulties, that's something that may help. Alright. So the main thing that you need to be kind of keeping your eyes out for in this game are just different interactions. Something just to give you some kind of new interaction of some variety. Like, for example, you see these lockpick doors over here. So lockpicks are going to be available throughout the entire game. They're going to be a universal resource for opening up a lot of different areas, and in most cases, you're actually going to break even on lockpicks. From what I've seen, there's definitely more... Actually, I don't know if there's definitely more or exactly enough lockpicks for every single door, so don't worry too much that you'll be locked out of any portion of the game. There's nothing that you can be locked out of or soft-locked out of, and I've been trying to soft-lock the game ever since getting early access to it. So, because I just figured, you know what, for a game with this many puzzles, surely there must be, something that needs fixing. As far as I've seen, there does not seem to be any way to actually properly soft-lock yourself that has not been patched. So, feel free to experiment around as you will. Alright. Next important thing, you see these empty drinking cups? Potentially keep some of those around. Those are your primary MP restoring item. We can't take that one. They're apparently currently sipping from it, which is honestly just rather rude. I mean, we were looking for a drink, but fine. The reason that I mention this is that a lot of your skills will take MP to use. And this is something that potentially can, be a little bit hard to come by in the heat of the moment. So, if you ever see containers like this, where it looks like a jug, or a barrel rather, with a spigot, bear those in mind. I know I've mentioned this both times I've covered the game already, but these are an important thing to take note of, because unlimited MP is very useful. Alright, in this case the table is in our way, so we couldn't get the drink, but now we can. I'm just going to go ahead and store a few of those over there. Okay, so, paying attention to interactions is important. Next thing, when you're going and selecting things, go ahead and tap barrels a couple of times rather than trying to break them. Now, you can break them if you need to, if something's in your way or whatever else, but bear in mind that you don't have to go break everything. It's going to be a lot faster if you were to just go around and well, hang on, where did my lantern just go? It's going to be a lot faster if you just go and select things directly. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and pick up this lantern here, go give this to somebody else to have another light source. Alright, next thing, let's go ahead and talk about our stats and skills. So as far as your skills are concerned, I know I've kind of glossed over this up to this point, but let's go ahead and start breaking this down a little bit. So, as far as knowing that you can't get yourself soft-locked, you kind of have two resources that you spend on this menu. One resource is going to be spent on your passives and abilities. So your abilities are going to be your primary means of unlocking new things. So if there's, say, a fire-based puzzle, or a lightning-based puzzle, or a movement-based puzzle, or anything like that, you're potentially going to have these three already solved in your first casting class. However, if you go over to the passives, you can see things like doing additional fire damage based on how much blood is nearby them, or let's say doing additional damage at close range, or getting additional bonuses off of things called sigils for 2 turns instead of when you're currently standing on them. Essentially, these are just going to be glowing tiles that will give you a temporary buff that you can take advantage of. So these will typically be like a power buff, a speed buff, a magic buff, or potentially, what was the other one? I feel like there was another one that I'm forgetting, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, point being, those are around. Certain classes are able to put these kinds of buffs down themselves, but again, just kind of read through your different skills, and they will tell you what they've got. And a lot of times, if you read the descriptive text of anything that's around, it will give you little hints of how things can interact. Like, let's say you take a look at the description of a statue, and it'll tell you that it's only loosely attached to the base, which means something like soil shift, where you're going and moving the ground, will allow the statue to topple over. If it's toppling over, it's got to fall down somewhere, meaning that you can drop that down on top of somebody, or stuff like that. So a lot of these are going to have kind of specific effects, like the stalagmire over here, next to, compared with the blood spike that the wizard gets, has 2 different functions. While they both put down spikes, in the case of the stalagmire over here, it's telling you specifically that it lowers movement for that target and surrounds them with spikes. This is essentially a way of saying that if, let's say, you have a movement debuff, and you attach this to a ranged weapon, and then you also hit them with the stalagmire, the one movement option that they have available to them is to then step onto the other tile for most units. So, just something to bear in mind. Most of them will move only 3 or 4 tiles, meaning that this can potentially put them into a catch-22 type of thing. So there is no, like, exact intended use for every single spell as far as I've seen. They're all just kind of there providing the information that you need. Essentially just giving you some kind of function for something. And again, even a lot of these more powerful ones, like, they will have a timer attached to them. That's what this little clock icon will notate for you. But you can use them outside of combat. So, like, one of the first classes that you'll unlock here is the Melder, who is kind of like a combination Geomancer healer kind of situation. So, like, personally, I used Quake for a opener whenever in closed areas, because you just kind of go around a corner, immediately go into your menu and cast Quake, and so essentially will go and hit everything in the room. Because in real time, the delay is very short. It's like a second, whereas in combat, it's going to be at the end of the enemy round. So essentially, it will whenever there's a time icon, it says that you will take that action at the end of the enemy round. Okay. So, always bear in mind to read all of these, but let's go ahead and continue on here. Okay. So, let's see what else. So, next let's go ahead and talk about our upgrades. So, these are going to be a bit... Wow. Apparently, completely misspeaking here today. So, these are going to be something that's different for every class and also always available. Now, one thing that had me confused for a while that I just want you to be aware of. Whenever you're gaining experience or you're gaining, I guess we can call them stat points or whatever else. What does it actually call them? I don't know. We're going to call them stat points. Anyway, whenever you're going and getting these are separate resources. You spend your experience over on these 2 tabs. You spend your skill points over here. These will be specifically for that class. They don't carry over between classes. I believe there's a little bit of a Final Fantasy Tactics thing in there, because you will occasionally get little bumps of additional experience towards a particular class whenever somebody's getting better. So I believe there is some spillover between your characters. But just so you know, that essentially you save your experience, but you can spend your stat points over here. Now, these will be different. Like, let's say the Chisel over here might be getting better with swords and spears specifically, so they can kind of spec into particular weapon types, whereas some of the other classes might potentially go for other things. And again, you will keep all of these passives as you go along. You see them down there on the bottom left, that they're just something that you'll be filling up on your bar. I believe that bar is actually if you've managed to pick up every single passive in the game. There's quite a few of them. But there's a lot of ways that these can potentially interact, because, again, they're very freeform. So, like, let's say Blaze Adept. I mentioned earlier that you can potentially use a lantern in combat. One of the earlier accessories that you can get, for example, will boost the fire damage inflicted by a lantern if used in a fight. Basically, you can't augment a lantern. It's not exactly a fantastic weapon. It's just more of a gimmick kind of thing. But let's say there was a wizard that was using something like Blaze Adept. They might be able to turn that lantern into something terrifying. So you basically get what I made on my main save file of some crazy bastard dual-wielding lanterns. But either way, it doesn't have to be optimal. Sometimes you do stuff just because it's fun. So, anyways, you don't have to completely min-max, but just so you're aware, these interactions are there, and they might be a way for you to get some additional damage out of a weird, tricky setup or some new weapon that you find. Every new weapon that you find will give you some new tools to potentially think about, and kind of a twist to kind of move around your build there. Just so you know, there is no, like, perfect end-all, be-all class that just beats everything because numbers big. Realistically, you're probably going to want to have people moving around their classes to learn different skills, because again, all of these skills are useful for different things. Also, I love the timed hits ability, and I love that there's an option to turn on timed hits mode. Wait a minute, was that a New Game Plus feature? Crap. Well, if it was, there's a timed hits mode. Anyway, so let's go ahead and continue on. So, like, let's say in his case, we look over his skills here, and we see that, like, we've already figured out what we can do with that chain there. Let's see, what else do we want to do off these starting classes? Like, something like this burst. Again, it doesn't have to be directly in front of you. Sometimes, you know, let's say you need to hit something sideways. Well, you know, think about how you might potentially be using these different spells. Think about every bit of their properties. So this thing ends up shooting sideways, right? So we pay attention to the fact that it can shoot sideways, and hey, that might be useful for something down the line. I don't know what for just yet, but hey, we might run into a puzzle where that might be a potential solution. In this case, we're just burning this poor bastard's house down. I apologize. Anyway, or something like an arc. Let's say you need to be able to hit something behind something. Well, there's an option for that. Pay attention to the properties of all of your different abilities. They'll all give you something extra to potentially think about beyond just damage. Damage will come. The options for actually controlling things, those are important. Okay. Actually, here, let's go ahead and pick up this crossbow. Chuck that on our bandolier person. There we go, pocket crossbow. Alright. So, whenever you run into a fight, and you will run into a fight like this, that you end up walking in and getting completely flattened, there is absolutely no shame in going and trying to explore a little bit more. Whether it's to find an easier fight to get yourself more experience, whether it's to potentially look around for other items to help you out, or if it's there to struggle, kind of stubbornly struggle and try to force your way through, all of these are the right option. You do as you will. Like, one of the main ideas of this game is that you have completely freeform exploration throughout everything. So if you wanted to run around, you know, exploring all these different puzzles and what have you, those options are there. Let's see. Actually, never scanned one of these the first time. Let's see. How does this form? Okay. I was hoping it would tell me more about them. But bear in mind, everything is a puzzle. So everywhere you look, everything you see is potentially another puzzle. So just explore, look around, see things, theorize what might potentially be, you know, something that you could solve with another skill. And this is actually something, one of those situations where I would actually recommend keeping experience on hand in order to make sure that you have enough skill points available to potentially solve a puzzle if you suddenly have that big aha moment where you're like, I need to be able to hit this thing sideways. Well, I have a few points for that. Let's go ahead and shoot this thing sideways. Now, this is something that you can actually save your essence crystals for as well if you want to go ahead and spend your points. But just remember to see the entire world as one big puzzle. Like in this case, I want to be able to get that item, so let's go ahead and pull that thing in. I know I'm using the chain pull a lot. I like using the chain pull. There's other ways to do it, but that particular one is, for me, it's one of those things that I personally find it special, just because it's one of those items that I always wanted in Golden Sun, as far as like an actual pull ability that you can do at longer range, and it was never there. It was always just 2 tiles away. So it's just, I don't know, it's weirdly satisfying in a nostalgic way to have that as an option. So don't forget to see everything as a puzzle. Some of these puzzles will go on for like half an hour. Like, you think you're solving one little puzzle, you know, looking for one item, and you're just there like going on for ages and ages and ages, and it's like, how long does this thing go? So, you know, there's a lot of puzzles, there's a lot of things to find. And yeah, so just go ahead and, you know, go ahead and enjoy the chew, so to speak, you know? Alright. So, your different weapon categories, again, there's no particular weapon category that will solve everything. Just like if it was something like Tactics Ogre, you can see all of them as a tool to use as you will. You know, sometimes you need to poke something in a distance with a spear. Maybe there are spears with more unique properties that take advantage of that. I don't know if it's technically spoilers to mention it, but I'll let you go ahead and discover that on your own. You know, maybe certain areas can be explored right now completely if we were to abuse some of the more like make use of mechanics that we saw earlier this video, or, you know, maybe we would need to respect the walls here. I don't know. It's funny how there's a rock blocking that particular location. I mean, we could hop around, I guess. I wonder if there's a more direct path over to there. Do you see it? Anyway, we'll just go ahead and let that little thing sit there. Alright. So yeah, just remember to keep your eyes open for a lot of different options. Okay. So with that out of the way, is there anything kind of super overpowered that you need to keep in mind here? Not really. What I would personally recommend as far as your party composition goes is to constantly keep things varied in terms of who's doing what, but always try and make sure, like, let's say you have... Okay, you've got kind of 2 different ways that you can go with your people ability-wise. You've kind of got the ones that are going to specialize more in terms of combat, like let's say we go down their different skills and we see that we can upgrade, very expensively upgrade a lot of your skills to go and get a massive increase to whatever it is. Like this Bite ability ends up getting 25% extra damage for every rank that it gets. And just so you know, your natural ranks aren't the maximum. You can actually augment your skills through other means as well. So potentially these can go up very, very high, but they may not be potentially expanding as much as they could, because whenever you're going and unlocking new classes, the only thing that it actually checks for is experience. So if you were to go down the list of experience here, you'll notice that the actual requirements are not that difficult. You can actually get most of the classes unlocked within a few hours of starting the game if you're going and, you know, not if you're only going for minimal requirements. And honestly, even when you end up unlocking those, most of these abilities are fairly cheap. Like upgrading this thing is $350 for 1 extra range, whereas getting those abilities in the first place are 100 or less most of the time. So personally, I would recommend always going for just the base unlocks of any class, and then just move on to the next one, and then start going back and kind of upgrading, seeing which ones you like. There really isn't anything directly like more powerful between your melee, your range, and your mage stuff. I would recommend keeping a mix of all of them. Because they've all got different roles, largely based on positioning, and some of it may be entirely circumstantial. Like with some of your casters and such like that, they may have a hard time reaching their targets with their shorter range and MP cost, but they may potentially be able to kind of make use of more environmental hazards. So like, let's say, do I have somebody with a spike unlocked here? No, I don't believe so. Here, let's go ahead and get the blood spike unlocked to show you what I mean. So we're going to go ahead and put down a blood spike here, and we're going to go ahead and put down a blood spike here. Now, like a smart person, we're going to go ahead and run over those, and we're going to go over to our one here that does lightning. We see that there's little speckles of blood on the ground, and if we were to hit this tile, it would end up hitting both those tiles as well. So this blood will fade away over time, but having either blood or water on the ground means that it can be electrified, and using certain abilities, you can cause other interactions there as well. So again, you don't have to do what the kind of standard approach to see that to make use of these mechanics. So, like, let's say if you wanted to create an electrical minefield, you absolutely could go and just, let's say, throw a bunch of spikes all over the place. Like, we already know that there's certain skills that will throw a lot of spikes out there. Wound your own people and then use that as a trap in and of itself, because that blood fading away is happening a lot faster in real time than it would in combat. So just something to bear in mind. It also does pool up as well. I should probably mention that, getting more intense with the more that there is on the ground there. So you'll end up seeing like complete dark red puddles by the time that fights start getting really intense if there were a lot of bleeding effects applied. So that can cause a lot of important interactions. Like I mentioned earlier, it's important to read those descriptions, like it says right here. The blood spike will actually interact with that by absorbing everything under them and doing a lot of extra damage as a result. So essentially, the more that there is in that puddle, the more that this move does. So while it is a trap in one sense, it's a kind of direct punishment follow-up move in another sense. Also, another ability that you want to keep your eyes on here is going to be something like Absorb. So Absorb is effectively your Dispel or Azuna or whatever you want to call it, but it actually gives you MP back. So you're essentially going and absorbing bad things to get good things. So very, very useful ability there. And okay, so that's, believe it or not, basically all you need to know to start exploring. Anything further than that, and we start getting into spoiler territory. So go ahead and explore. Use the information that you got here to hopefully go solve yourself some puzzles. I'll be doing more specific guides over time once the game has been out for a little while and people can experience it a little bit, if folks are actually struggling. Alrighty, so just to end this off here, I wanted to mention that, every now and then as you're traveling along, your people will end up eating the dust. This is alright. This happens. A lot of times you'll be getting out of situations just by the skin of your teeth, and there's really no long-term consequences for somebody getting knocked out. Now, that being said, you'll notice, if you look down there at the bottom, that his maximum is currently at 5 out of 5, even though technically, according to this, it should be higher than that. So, when this happens, this is because somebody got knocked out and they reached the end of their timer, which means that their maximums will start going down. Now, you can still make it by, and this will continue going down lower and lower and lower, and, you can, as long as you're stubborn enough, you can definitely make it work. However, it's a bit of an inconvenience. So don't forget that you still have a home base over here. So when you go in, obviously one of the more important things to do is just to go ahead and make it a bit more homey every time you go back and come home here. Just go ahead and get things set on fire as you do. Light the place up a little bit. But bear in mind, you actually have a few services that will start expanding in your home here. In time, you'll get options for getting around a little bit faster, as well as a few others that I won't be spoiling, but you actually start off with a shop right away. If you go over to this guy, he'll go ahead and give you some advice, as well as giving you a few different things that you'll want to pick up over time. This guy restocks seemingly every time you do something interesting, so bear in mind that this guy is over here. He actually will more than likely be your most valuable store. There are other stores around for different specialty things, but just so you know, this guy is here, and he's probably going to have some of the more unique stuff that you'll need. But whenever your campfire is lit, you can actually go over here, and you can go ahead and take a bit of a rest and reminisce about your day with your other people. And so that's how you should generally wrap up a play session here. You just go home, you get everybody all restored, and they'll go and they'll talk about their backstories, they'll talk about the stuff that you were up to that day, as well as a few other little bits and pieces here and there. So there's actually a surprising amount of these. I know over my entire first playthrough, I actually didn't see any repeats or anything, but you'll get a few little bits of dialogue to kind of insert as you will here. But anyway, that's about that. So y'all have yourselves a good one. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.